All right, this morning our interview is with Terry Smith. Terry's been involved with his family's funeral home business here in Columbia City for many years. He grew up here in Columbia City, so sure he has many interesting stories. So we'll turn it over to you, Terry.
Okay. Yes, my name's Terrence Smith. I lived here in Columbia City most of my life. I was born at the Linville Hospital in Columbia City. That's why I say they've not torn it down, because I was born there. Different places that I've lived, not many. I went to Manchester College for 2 years, and then I transferred to the Indiana College of Mortuary Science in Indianapolis, and I was there a year. And following my graduation, I did live in Albion for just a year before I moved back to Columbia City, and I've been here ever since. My parents are Stuart and Ada Smith, and I have 4 children. Jean, who works with us, Taryn, who's the general manager of D.O. McCombs in Fort Wayne, Sharon is a psychologist and lives in Eugene, Oregon, and Scott, who lives here in Columbia City and works with us. Smith & Sons Funeral Home was founded in May of 1851. My great-grandfather moved to South Whitley and started the business there. During the Civil War, my great-grandfather, who was 15 years old, ran off to join the Union Army, and his mother sent Dad after him to bring him home. It ended up they both stayed. And following the Civil War, they moved to Laurelville, which at that time was the up-and-coming town in Whitley County. And if you would tell someone that today, they would say you're lost it. And they were there until, my grandfather moved to Columbia City in 1924, I believe it was. And we've been in Columbia City ever since. We've been in the present location since 1935. It was the home of Simon J. Peabody. It had been empty for about 2 years after following Mr. Peabody's death. And a fellow that was a realtor here in town talked my grandfather into buying it to use it for a funeral home. That's about the time that funeral homes were coming into what we know as a funeral home today. We've added on to the building, I think, about 5 or 6 times since that time.
That second question there, where did you go to school? Where did you attend school? Did you go here to Columbia City?
I went to Columbia City all my life.
Didn't start out. What elementary school did you go to?
West Ward.
West Ward. Okay.
Yeah, West Ward, and then high school.
Okay.
How did I get to school? I walked. And I went home at noontime. They didn't have a cafeteria like they have now.
Yeah. Now West Ward's gone. Did it burn, or did they?
It was torn down.
It torn down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So, you remember your first automobile?
My first automobile was a '49 Ford. I paid $500 for it, and I bought it from C.W. Schrader's here in Columbia City. I thought it was quite a car.
I had one like that too. Okay. Now you told us some about the history of your funeral home there and how it was founded and so forth. I'm always kind of interested in the vehicles you used, how many you have and how you use them, and then you also have that carriage that you have.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite a pretty fancy piece of equipment.
I have some antique funeral vehicles. Only one of them was a vehicle that we had, but we had others that were similar to what I bought. I have a horse-drawn hearse, which was made in 1880. Then I have a 49 Miller. It's a Cadillac, but made by the Miller Company and over in Ohio. It's a 49. And then I have a 67 S&S Cadillac. That's a side-loading funeral coach. I have a 67 Oldsmobile Shorty, which means it was built on a regular car chassis rather than being extended. I have a Lincoln. Let's see, it'd be a 79, I guess. Last year that they made a big car. I have a 86 Cadillac limousine, and then we have a 96 Cadillac limousine, which we still use. And then we have a 2003 Cadillac funeral coach, which we use today. And we have a couple of vans that we use for various things, various reasons. Transport flowers to the cemetery. Then we have one that we use for removals. Let's see, I have a couple other antique ambulances. They're straight ambulances. One's a 76. I have a Oldsmobile that's a 73, I believe. Has a high top where the roof's been raised.
Did you ever use those vehicles, your antique collection? Did you ever use those? Did anybody ever request, special request to use those?
Yes, I have on several occasions. The one gentleman asked me to use the 49 for his wife, and she was buried in a little cemetery up by Albion. And I said, if it'll run, I'll use it. And it took a battery to get it to go. And I was a little concerned whether it would make it up there or not, so I had my son follow us in the regular funeral coach, and just in case it broke down, but it made it. And then a couple other times, there were people that were buried in local cemeteries, and they didn't have any problem. But it was kind of funny. When they came in, they said, "No, we want you to use that old funeral coach you have." And I said, "Which old funeral coach?" They said, "Well, the one that was sitting back behind here." And I said, "Well, there were two of them, a 67 and a 49. "Oh, well, we want the oldest one."
That was a 49.
49, yes.
Now,
And it still runs.
oh, good. Now, tell us a little bit about how you got that horse-drawn carriage, hearse. Where you got it, and when you use it, and a little bit about it. It's a pretty nice piece of equipment, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's not large enough to put a casket of today's standard in the back. It was used when they had just little toe pincher caskets, as we called them. It came from Mackinac Island. And Mackinac Island sold it to a funeral director in Fraser, Michigan. And he sold it to me. He was able to get another horse-drawn hearse that was more of his liking. So I bought this one from him. Um, and my intentions are to one of these days make a place out in around the funeral home where we can put it to see. Right now it's kind of sad. When we were putting it in the Old Settlers Day parade 4 or 5 years ago, my wife and Gene Burns drove it from the funeral home up to the high school where they were lining up the parade, and a horse spooked the team of horses that was hitched to ours, and he had to turn it real short, and it snapped the tongue and upset the buggy. And so there's some damage to it, which I have a fellow lined up that'll fix it as soon as my wife decides to leave me do it.
Oh dear. How many times have you used that? If you can't put a casket in there, how do you use it in a funeral?
Well, funeral today you couldn't use. You couldn't use it.
Okay. So, okay. So it's been a while since you've used that.
Yeah,
actually, in a
yeah.
funeral, yeah.
I had a neighbor of mine always told me I had to take him to the cemetery in horse-drawn hearse, and I said, well, your casket won't fit in the back. And, well, when he died, I had a friend down at Huntington that had a horse-drawn hearse, and I called him and asked him if he would bring his, and he said he would. And so we were able to use a horse-drawn hearse for the service.
Yeah. So he's got one that's long enough to put a full-size casket in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's not quite as ornate or as fancy as what the one I have.
Yeah, I remember yours is really, it's got a lot of fancy decorations
Yes.
on it and a lot of glass and
Yeah, it is. And the back doors has curved glass. And in fact, one of those is broken.
yeah.
But
Wow.
we were able to trace down a company that will make one for it.
Yeah, that's quite a piece of equipment. Okay. I had a question here. What changes have you seen in your lifetime here in Whately County that has made the biggest impact on your life?
Well, I suppose that the biggest thing would be today a lot of folks opt to have cremation rather than earth burial. That's probably the biggest thing that I've seen in my lifetime.
Yeah, that's a change. So whereabouts around here do they cremate people? Is it you have to go to Fort Wayne or?
Yes, you can go to Fort Wayne. There are, I think there are 3 crematories in Fort Wayne, 3 or 4, and then there's one in Huntington. We used the one in Huntington.
Do you remember when you first lived here in Columbia City? Do you remember did you ever not have electricity, or do you?
We always had electricity. We always had running water.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not quite that old.
Yeah. So that's good. Yeah. So that's some people that we've interviewed had to start from without electricity.
Well, there were folks that lived in the country when I first started in this business that didn't have electricity.
Probably a lot of them didn't have indoor plumbing either.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Looking back over your lifetime here, what would you consider the best years in your life here in Columbia City?
Well, I would say probably the 70s, 1970s.
Yeah. Any particular reason why? Those are good years.
We don't want to get into politics.
Okay, all right, okay, good. All right, that's fine. Okay, all right. Well, what else? You got any interesting stories as far as funeral processions, or the funeral business here, and burial and cemeteries. Any interesting stories you could tell? Are kind of unusual or
Well,
different?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I know people today are not as careful when they drive. They'll cut through a procession, they'll cut in front of a procession, all of which is against the law.
Yeah.
And it's something that people need to be aware of. Um, some stories I have to be a little careful if I even tell, but we had a fellow who lived, I'm not going to say who he was, I got to think how I do this so I don't let it slip who he is. Anyway, we were burying his dad in a cemetery in Huntington, and they didn't know for sure whether this fellow would go to the cemetery. And at the last minute before the funeral started, he decided he was going to go to the cemetery and he was going to ride with me. Okay. Well, I had when I had ordered the vault, boy that worked for the vault company was 18 years old, and he said there wasn't anything he hadn't seen. And I told him, I said, is that right? I said, there's always something new every day. And when I ordered the vault, I said, now you make sure that Pat brings the vault. Well, why do they want Pat to bring the vault? I said, well, the family requested him to come, which wasn't quite true, but I finally got him convinced of that. And so Pat was at the cemetery, and I knew that I wasn't going to be there that day. And that's another reason that I did that. And so when the boy got back that took the funeral down, I said, well, how did you make out? Well, at the last minute, he jumped in the front seat of the funeral coach and rode down to Huntington in the front seat. And they pulled in the cemetery, and here came Pat running down there, and he said, why did you want me to bring this vault? I said, I don't know these people. All at the same time, this fellow jumped out the front of the funeral coach and just unzipped his pants and let her go.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
And he said, have you ever met this man? No. He says, that's why they wanted you to come to the funeral coach, so you could see that there was going to be something different today.
Now, you talk about funeral processions. What is the law, exact law on when you meet a funeral procession? A lot of cars pull over and stop. Is that supposed to be?
No. You can keep going. It's kind of customary, and I noticed that it's the younger people that'll pull off and stop. The older folks, they'll get to gawking and not watching where they're going, and then they run into another one. But there's no law regarding meeting a funeral procession. You can't pass a funeral procession. You have to, if you're going across, you have to stop and let them go. Even if they have the red light, you have to stop.
And that's interesting. You say more of the younger people stop.
Yeah, that's just from observation.
Yeah. It used to be you go see a funeral procession and everybody stopped. And
yeah.
Over the years, I suppose that's changed.
We had one going to Huntington the other day, and I noticed probably half of the cars that we met stopped. Most times the rest of them slowed up.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with us, Terry, about your life?
Well, I'll try to answer anything you ask me, but But
It's difficult if you haven't got a question. Well, thank you very much. We
Sure.
appreciate that, and taking time to come down here and share with us
sure.
about the funeral business, and I think we learned some things today. So
Okay.
thank you very
Mhm.
much.